There is a pattern in history that appears across every empire, every economy, every system of power that has ever risen and believed itself eternal. 3 times in the last 5 centuries, the wealthiest nations on earth followed the exact same sequence of stages, denied the same warnings, ignored the same mathematics, and collapsed in the same catastrophic fashion. And right now, the world is following the exact same sequence, step by step, with a precision so perfect it should terrify anyone paying attention. The pattern begins with expansion. A nation discovers new wealth, new territory, new methods of extraction. Spain found silver in the Americas and believed it had secured infinite prosperity. The crown spent wildly, financed wars across Europe, built cathedrals and palaces, convinced that the flow of precious metals would never stop. The elites lived in luxury while the population struggled under taxation that existed solely to service debts taken on imperial fantasy. They borrowed against future silver shipments, mortgaging wealth that had not yet been pulled from the ground. The system worked as long as confidence held, but silver production peaked, costs rose. The empire had built an economy that required endless growth to survive, and when growth slowed, the entire structure began to crack. Inflation ravaged the currency. The crown debased the coinage. Public trust evaporated. Within decades, Spain went from the most powerful empire on earth to a hollow shell, bankrupt and irrelevant. They all thought they were different. Britain followed the same path 3 centuries later. The empire stretched across a quarter of the planet, controlling trade routes, resources, and populations on a scale never before seen. London became the financial center of the world, managing debts and credits for nations that depended on British capital to function. The pound sterling was trusted universally, but expansion demands expenditure. Wars in Europe, administration across colonies, infrastructure to maintain control, all of it required borrowing. The First World War shattered the illusion. Britain borrowed staggering sums from the United States, turning from creditor to debtor in less than a decade. The empire survived the war but emerged financially crippled. The economy never recovered its pre-war strength. Unemployment rose, social unrest spread, the colonies began demanding independence. The elites clung to the symbols of power while the foundations rotted. By the end of the Second World War, Britain was forced to dismantle the empire not by choice, but by financial necessity. The debt had become unsustainable. The currency collapsed. The global system moved on. This is not theory. This is historical fact. The United States took Britain's place as the global hegemon, and for decades the system functioned smoothly. The dollar replaced the pound as the world's reserve currency. American military power guaranteed global trade routes. Corporations expanded into every market. The standard of living rose, but the same pattern was already unfolding beneath the surface. The cost of maintaining global dominance grew every year. Military bases in over 70 countries. Wars in Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan. Social programs to maintain domestic stability. Tax cuts that reduced revenue while spending continued to climb. The government borrowed to cover the gap, and the gap widened every year. The national debt crossed $1 trillion in the 1980s, then $5 trillion, then 10, then 20, then 30. The pace accelerated. The system required continuous borrowing to function, and the borrowing required continuous confidence that the debt would be repaid. Once the foundation cracks, collapse is inevitable. Every empire follows the same stages because the incentives never change. Leaders are rewarded for short-term growth, not long-term stability. Debt allows governments to promise benefits today, while pushing the cost into the future. Citizens demand services but resist taxation. Elites extract wealth and hide it offshore. The military-industrial complex demands funding to protect interests abroad. The financial sector grows larger and more fragile, building towers of leverage on foundations of imaginary value. And everyone believes the system will continue because it has always continued. History repeats not because it has to, but because people never change. The mechanism operates in stages that are invisible until they become irreversible. First comes the period of genuine growth. Productivity rises, new industries emerge, Wealth spreads unevenly, but spreads nonetheless. The population believes in progress. Second comes the financialization phase. Real growth slows, but the appearance of growth continues through credit expansion, asset inflation, and speculative bubbles. Debt grows faster than the economy. Third comes the instability phase. Bubbles burst. Recessions hit harder. Recoveries weaken. Inequality widens. Trust erodes. Fourth comes the desperation phase. Governments resort to monetary manipulation, stimulus packages, bailouts, and political theater to maintain confidence. The debt becomes unmanageable, but no one dares admit it. Fifth comes the acceleration phase. Crisis follows crisis. The system lurches from emergency to emergency. Authoritarian impulses strengthen. Scapegoats are found. Sixth comes the collapse. It arrives not gradually, but suddenly, when a critical mass of actors simultaneously realizes the system cannot continue. The pattern does not care about belief or ideology. Rome understood this cycle intimately. The Republic expanded through conquest, and conquest brought wealth. Slaves worked the fields. Gold flowed into the treasury. Infrastructure connected the empire. But expansion has limits. Once Rome reached the boundaries of the known world, growth stopped. The economy had been built on continuous conquest, and without new territory to exploit. The system began consuming itself. The currency was debased to pay the legions. Inflation destroyed savings. The elite retreated to fortified estates. The population fragmented. Barbarian tribes pressed the borders. The military demanded higher pay to remain loyal. Emperors rose and fell in rapid succession, each one promising restoration while accelerating decay. The collapse took centuries, but once it began, every attempt to reverse it only made the fall steeper. The math never lies. France in the 18th century provides the clearest example of sudden collapse. The monarchy ruled a wealthy, populous, culturally dominant nation. Paris set the trends for Europe. The army was one of the largest on the continent, but the treasury was empty. Decades of war had drained the coffers. The elite refused to pay taxes. The burden fell on the peasantry and the emerging middle class, who paid but received no representation. The government borrowed to cover deficits, and the interest on the debt consumed half the annual budget. Reformers warned of insolvency. The king dismissed them. The aristocracy clung to privileges. Then the government tried to raise taxes. The population refused. The entire system shattered in months. The revolution was not caused by philosophy or ideology, it was caused by bankruptcy. Once the system enters this phase, collapse accelerates. We are already in stage 4. The signs are not subtle. They are glaring, undeniable, and intentionally ignored by those who benefit from the current structure. The United States national debt exceeds $35 trillion and grows by trillions every year. Debt to GDP ratios in developed nations have reached levels historically associated with default or hyperinflation. Central banks printed money on a scale never before attempted, calling it stimulus, and the population accepted the illusion because asset prices rose. Real wages stagnated for decades while costs for housing, healthcare, and education skyrocketed. The middle class is being hollowed out. Wealth concentrates at the top. Political systems are paralyzed by polarization. Trust in institutions has collapsed. The population knows something is wrong, but cannot articulate the mechanism. The elites know the system is failing, but cannot stop extracting. Collapse never moves in a straight line, it jumps. The economic domain shows every symptom of terminal fragility. Central banks are trapped. Interest rates were held near zero for over a decade to prevent recession. And when inflation returned, raising rates triggered banking crises, market crashes, and credit stress. The bond market, the foundation of global finance, is unstable. Governments cannot afford higher rates because the interest payments on existing debt become unsustainable. Corporations are addicted to cheap credit and cannot survive without it. Asset bubbles have inflated in real estate, stocks, and speculative investments, and every bubble eventually bursts. The dollar remains the global reserve currency only because no alternative exists. But confidence is eroding. Nations are slowly, quietly, building systems to bypass dollar dominance. The moment confidence breaks, the entire structure collapses. The political domain is already fragmenting. Democracies are losing legitimacy because they no longer deliver prosperity. Populist movements rise on both left and right, each blaming different enemies but united in rejecting the status quo. Elites retreat into fortified enclaves, physical and ideological. Corruption is no longer hidden, it is normalized. Lobbyists write legislation. Corporations buy policy. The judiciary is politicized. Elections are contested. Institutions designed to mediate conflict are failing. Authoritarian impulses are strengthening everywhere, not because populations desire dictatorship, but because the promise of order becomes appealing. When chaos looms, what takes centuries to build can disintegrate in a single season. The social domain is breaking. Communities no longer share common narratives. Media fragments into tribal echo chambers. Distrust spreads across every institution: government, medicine, science, education, finance. The population does not believe official statistics. Conspiracy theories flourish not because people are irrational, but because the official story is demonstrably incomplete or false. Social mobility has frozen. Young generations face worse prospects than their parents for the first time in modern history. Resentment builds. Protests erupt and are suppressed. The cycle repeats. Division is encouraged by those who benefit from distraction. Once confidence breaks, systems fall faster than anyone expects.